So one of the more interesting products to come out last year was Schwalbe's Procore system. If you don't know what it is, well, I'm going to try and explain it as simply as I can. Basically, you've got a high pressure, small volume tyre that sits inside your regular mountain bike tubeless tyre setup. The idea is that this Procore system holds the bead of your tyre onto the rim with a fair bit of pressure, so it can't tear out, it can't burp, it can't roll off the rim. And this little inner tyre gives a little extra stability to the tyre and also prevents pinches or rim damage when you hit sort of a square-edged hit pretty hard. So in order to fit Procore, I found it a pretty simple system. Some other testers have found it a little bit trickier. In essence, you put the Procore system in, half a regular tyre in, then the other half of the tyre. Then you pump up the Procore system, then with your special valve which allows you to inflate the outer as well, you inflate the outer. Pretty simple in a lot of ways. You need a rim with an internal width of at least 23.5 millimeters. So that's sort of getting towards a wider rim. This is so that you can fit the whole system inside. It takes a little bit longer than a regular tubeless tyre setup, assuming that that regular tubeless tyre setup pops straight into the rim. If you've got a tubeless tyre setup which is a bit of a faff, so you're losing a lot of air through the bead, then you might actually find Procore a little bit easier. So first off, I'm going to talk about the good stuff about Procore. First of all, once it's fitted, what you have is a system that enables you to run extra low pressures in your regular tyre without all the associated risks that come with that. The Procore system pushes the bead of the tyre into the rim really firmly because you inflate this inner sort of core to around 70 psi, there or thereabouts. This holds the tyre very strongly onto the rim, so you can't burp it if you're running lower pressures and you sort of go into a corner, for example. The other benefit, of course, is that with a lower pressure, your tyre is going to deform more when you hit, say, a root or a rock. Often, if you're running, say, an inner tube, or even with some tubeless setups, you're more prone to pinch puncturing the tyre or the tube and damaging the rim normally. With Procore, you have this extra protection in there because this higher pressure inner tyre protects the rim from those impacts and therefore protects the tyre from being pinched. I rode a wheel set with Procore in the Alps for 2 weeks. Normally in this time I'd expect to get a couple of punctures, and even down to sort of between 14 and 18 psi, which is what I was running in a relatively regular tyre, I didn't have any issues at all. I didn't roll the tyre off the rim, I didn't burp, didn't get any punctures, and I didn't even ding the rim. So in that respect it's worked really well for me. In terms of ride feel, then I'm able to run these lower pressures, which obviously gives me phenomenal amounts of grip compared to what I might have had. I'm running between 5 and 8 psi less than normal, so obviously grip is massively improved. With the Procore system inside, I'm getting a little bit extra stability, which again is a benefit when you're running lower pressures, as it resists tyre roll a little bit more. One of the other sort of advantages I found was that if I'm running these lower pressures where usually I'd be expecting to feel some tyre roll, I'm not getting that quite so much because the Procore is supporting the tyre even at these lower pressures. So if those are the advantages, well, there are some disadvantages to the system as well. One of the things that a lot of people have talked about with Procore is the weight of the system. If you've got a regular tubeless setup, then you'll be adding around 200 grams per wheel to the system when you've taken into account the little inner tube and the sheath. Obviously you're going to be using sealant in both of those systems. The interesting thing though is that if you're running a heavier weight tyre to resist things like pinch punctures or so you can get a stiffer sidewall, you might be able to get away with a lighter tyre if you're running Procore. So instead of running, say, an 1100 gram downhill tyre, you might be able to get away with an 800 gram trail tyre. So the weight argument is a difficult one to sum up, and it really depends on what your current setup is. So the big elephant in the room with Procore is the price. In the UK it comes in at £157, which, when you look at it, is a lot of money. In effect, for that price you're getting 2 little inner tubes with quite a fancy valve, 2 sort of nylon sheaths, a couple of tyre levers, a little bit of sealant and some easy on stuff. Without sounding too harsh, it's an absolute rip-off. I was going to put a but after that statement, but when you really think about it, there's nothing else to say. It's incredibly expensive. For me, I think if say it cost 40 quid, that at that point becomes a really interesting system which is viable for many people, But okay, so it was the first to market with this idea, and there must have been some sort of quite a bit of development time that goes into it, but it does feel to me that Schwalbe is sort of making their cake and eating it, you know? They could charge a little bit less and perhaps get quite a few more people buying it. But at the end of the day, it's called Procore. It's probably going to suit sort of people who are absolute hard chargers, who do really want to get the best performance out of their bike. And I guess if Schwalbe think they can charge it, well, maybe they can. So aside from the price, there are a couple of other things that we're not so super keen on. First off, if you do hit sort of a rock or a route really hard, you get through sort of the tyre's natural travel and then you go into this Procore system, which is protecting your rim. The rebound from that is quite pingy because you're going into, say, a 70 odd PSI sort of bit of the tyre. So if you are sort of an absolute hard charger and really attuned to how the bike feels, you might find this a little bit distracting. The other thing we found is that, kind of like plus bikes in a way, tyre pressure is incredibly important to get right when you're running a Procore system. Changes of only a few PSI dramatically change the feel of the bike. Also, we found that in some situations we wanted to ride much higher pressures, and in other areas we were getting away with riding much lower pressures. So we kind of found that on an individual ride basis, we had to run different pressures in the outer tyre. If you're not such a sort of a tyre nerd or a bit of a geek about your tyre pressures, you might find this a little overwhelming, or you might just not get the best out of the system when you ride it. It's also not a completely infallible system, so we've got on with it pretty well. You know, it's protected us from punctures, we've been able to run low pressures, but there have been some pretty public sort of failures of Procore, especially on the downhill scene last year. Some people will call that out as saying, oh, well, it doesn't work. For me, I don't know. We don't know how the bike would have reacted if it hadn't got Procore in. So you see the failures, but what you don't see is the number of times, perhaps, that it saved a guy from having a puncture. So ultimately, what we have is a system which gives you extra grip, lower pressures, and better tyre stability and safety. Cross-country riders might find it a little bit too heavy. Trail riders who are on the sort of the large end of the scale may well benefit from it if you're already ripping tyres off the rims. Enduro racers or downhill riders probably will benefit from the system because you might be able to get away with a lighter weight tyre running with Procore. Our only real problem with it is the price. At £157, it's going to put a lot of people out of the market for this. I don't think Schwalbe are going to get massive traction with Procore for now.